this is our first episode. We were chatting and we thought of coming up with a channel.
Anna's idea, and I just said yes.
She said yes, but she came up with all these wonderful ways of presenting it. So specifically oriented towards tarot artists that are looking to get into tarot and who worked really hard on their decks and would like some help promoting their decks to get their word out so people can understand where they're coming from and pretty much see the art that's going behind the scenes. I think that at this point in time, you do have an imbalance in creators, in the sense that you have very well-known creators that already have a following, but it's much easier, right? We've gone through the journey, and now we have a somewhat of a following, and it's easy to put up a deck and people already know what's going on, versus somebody who's never done that and would really love to get into creating tarot, or have their tarot is already done and they have no means of getting the word out. So this is where we would come in, pretty much trying to
raise their voices and produce a platform that can elevate the voices of tarot artists who are really artsy but don't know the business side. So we hope to be able to help give some educational material on the marketing, PR, and business side of tarot.
That's right. See how eloquently she put it. So I think it's important because artists come from different backgrounds, and majority, a lot of them are self-taught, and you have this idea in your head when you create it, and then you start working on it and you get stuck. You don't know where to go and how to move forward. And it can be a very wonderful deck. And if you just put out a Kickstarter and nobody knows you, the chances of having success and creating a product that is funded, it can go either way. There's no set 100% that it's going to work.
So we're hoping to be able to provide some insider tips and what we've learned to help tip the scales and help the up and coming artists create a platform for success.
Exactly. And during the process, we're hoping to bring in some known deck creators, and also hopefully editors and just some different people from different backgrounds that can support and present their point of view in terms of the market and how things are moving behind the scenes.
Really interesting voices, perspectives, and people from all aspects of the industry.
So we're going to do a little bit of a interview with each other. Mm-hmm. We're going to just back and forth some questions, kind of like what we would be asking if somebody were to come on the platform. And the questions are obviously geared toward the tarot community, because this is the community that we're trying to raise awareness for. All right, so
I shall ask first. Oh. I love this question that we brainstormed together. What's your favorite suit to illustrate? When you became an artist and you decided to illustrate the tarot deck, which suit for you?
I love the Suit of Swords. That is my favorite suit.
I knew you were going to say that because of the Tarot of the Abyss, the 2 3 of Swords and the 2 10 of Swords. And it just felt like you put so much extra energy into the swords suit. I was like, I bet you she's going to say swords. That was my guess before we started.
Yeah, I love the Suit of Swords. When I was younger, so I was reading tarot before I created tarot. I loved this Suit of Cups, and I was all about cups. And then that was like my 20s. And then I entered my 30s and I started to move away. And I was like more interested into the swords, and their, I don't know, there's just like something about it that an extra
The
layer, I
maturity.
guess, the mental aspect of it. So swords are my favorite. What about you?
You know, I actually, the funny thing is I also debated between swords and cups. And ultimately I decided to say cups because I felt like the energy is very different from my own energy. And so it's more aspirational, it's romantic, it's the level of emotional and spiritual, like that energy that I lack myself. So I had a lot of fun aspirationally working on the suit of cups, but I feel more home in the suit of swords.
Yeah, so like for me, like also like wands is my least favorite.
Yeah, same here. Oh my
It's
God,
like
we're so
my least
similar.
favorite. I don't know. I always kind of leave it till the end. So and like I'll do the ones that I really love. But it's ironic because I am a fire sign. So
Mm.
you think I would gravitate more towards fire, but no. So don't like
Wow,
wands.
that is so
All
cool.
right, let's see. Next, I'm gonna ask you. So, okay, so in terms of your background, how did you come to illustrate your own tarot deck?
I came to illustrate, well, I was a tarot author. I've always been to the tarot. So I already kind of established a platform as a tarot author and writing deck reviews. And then one day on Twitter, just in the middle of the night, I had this whim of an idea to illustrate my own tarot deck. And then I just decided, why not try it? So I ended up trying it. And that was my first hand. It was all by hand at the time, pen and ink illustrations only. So it's kind of like amateur art. Like it didn't look that great. I love it, but you know, you could tell an amateur did it. And then that actually opened up the gates of interest in just deepening my understanding of tarot art as an art, right? And then so I taught myself art history, I taught myself the different forms of art, different techniques in art, and then I kept going back to the same architecture of the Spirit Keepers Tarot and kept going at it at every stage of improving my own personal art skills. And that's how we now have the full color Spirit Keepers Tarot. That's my
I remember when I first saw you doing the pen and ink for it, and I was like, she can also draw in pen and ink. Because I was actually talking, I remember with Avalon, I'm like, she can draw in pen and ink. I was very surprised. And then when you migrated from traditional pen and ink, you went to the computer, you're doing everything with the program, and you taught yourself that too. And I was like, again, I have no idea how to do that, by the way.
Well, the pandemic did give me a whole ton of time to sit home with an iPad and kind of learn that. I still do the line work by hand because the digital pen for me is just too difficult to really control. Like I really like the fine line of an ink pen in your hand. So I still do the line work by hand. I scan it in and then I do all of the coloring digitally.
Yeah. I think it's amazing.
Hey, how about you? How did you get into illustrating tarot? I know you have an art background.
I do. I have, well, yeah, I have a fine art background. I did a high school in a trade school, fine art school in Romania, and I graduated because we all graduate with a degree. My degree was in graphic design, but traditional graphic design, like pen and ink, and also etching, more like we were doing like the Rembrandt kind of thing. So that's how I got trained. And then I have a BFA in painting and drawing and a master's in communication and packaging design. So then I went to advertising. So I worked in advertising for a number of years in pharmaceutical advertising, which is totally different than So I worked in that, and then I had my daughter, and I just couldn't stand the hours because the hours were very late, like midnight, and it just wasn't good for my lifestyle the way it changed. I was never home. So I decided to go back to fine art, and what happened was I started reading tarot again because I had like a big chunk of years where I wasn't reading. I was at work all the time, so I wasn't really doing any more tarot, even though I have been reading cards since very young age in Romania. But so I started again, and then I had like an idea of, well, what if you can read tarot and you can, it's all like intuitive in the same time with all the information coming from the outside, right? Because you have all this, you're tapping into a different type of world and energy and information. Well, wouldn't you be able to just read anything that's abstract based on that? So I created the Hidden Waters Tarot, like within like a month. I just did Rorschach images because it's based on Rorschach images where they mirror. And I pretty much did it for myself. I was like very curious to see what would happen. And I just put it out. I think I sent it to Eclectic Tarot by the time it was Eclectic Tarot. And then I started getting people asking me for the deck. So I was very confused because I didn't know really what to do at that point. I didn't know how to put it out. I designed it, I printed it for myself, but didn't really know how to set up shop and stuff. So I put it up on Etsy initially. That's how I kind of went into it. And that was the first deck, which was abstract, which is not anything that I'm doing right now.
It's funny that you mentioned Rembrandt, because the precision of your detail work and then your lighting, the way you play with dark and light in the contrast of dark and light in all of your artwork, or at least the more recent artwork. Then you say Rembrandt, I'm like, oh, I totally see that influence, or at least that early training. So that was
very cool. Rembrandt was big in Albert Dürer.
Oh, Dürer, yeah, I see that in your artwork for sure. Oh my God.
Those were the two that we used to draw after.
Very cool.
All right, next question. I am going to ask you, at what point in your creative process do you finally realize you're going to commit to completing illustration for your deck?
I'm pretty hardcore, so I would say as soon as I started, as soon as I put the first pen tip to create that first line of the first card, I'm like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to finish it. There's no way I'm not going to finish this deck. I don't care come hell or high water, how long it takes. It doesn't matter. This deck is getting done. How about you?
No, actually, no.
Okay, we're different now. Suddenly we have differences.
Well, I will do a couple of, so like I have to be in, probably I have to finish like one suit, and then I'm confident that I will do the deck. For my personal ones, if I'm doing it for somebody else, I'm obviously committed to do it. But for the ones that I do for myself, like for the Abyss Tarot, I wasn't really sure until I was midway in the Major Arcana. And then because it was a lot of work. So I was like, do I really want to sit and draw in pen and ink 78 illustrations? So yeah, I'm more undecisive in that aspect.
I want to go off script, but I think it's so important to hear from an artist. What was the difference creatively for you between being commissioned and doing the artwork for somebody versus doing your own art and doing your own and visualizing your own creativity?
So it's the difference is in the sense, like, obviously when you're creating your own deck, you have to come up with the idea, you sketch it out, and you have to have somewhat of a plan in terms of how you're going to work through the particular suit or arcana, right? And so you can't just not think about it and sit down and draw. You have to know, again, like have an idea, do some research, visual research, and then draw it out. The problem is with that, it's a little harder because if you don't have anybody to bounce ideas with, in the sense of, does this work? Does this not work? And this is where the community comes in, because usually I think it's a good thing if you're working by yourself to bounce ideas back through other people, especially since they're going to be reading with a deck. So alone, it's a little harder. Working for somebody that's hired you, I think, is a little easier because assumingly they've already come up with an idea when they hire an illustrator, and then they present those ideas to the illustrator, and the illustrator will say, yes, it's going to work. No, it's going to work. Why don't we do this? But already he's getting a lot of information that normally you would not get. So it's a little bit easier in terms of, okay, I know I'm going to go illustrate, I'm going to look for this image. The person wants a horse, I'm going to look for a horse, you know, so there's like a little bit of more of a guidance. It's like having a map. It's almost like somebody's telling you to go to a particular place and they're giving you a location and an address and you kind of know how to get there, versus I know I want to get to one place, but I don't know how to get there. So
that's so interesting in terms of the perspective, because I've heard from traditional or fine artists that it's actually harder to do commissioned work because they feel more confined by commissioned work. So I thought that was really interesting that you thought it was easier to do commissioned work versus your own creative work.
For me, well, maybe because I also work in advertising. So a lot of the times in advertising, you work on a project with a group and they tell you, you know, okay, we have to do this. So it's a little bit more structured and I'm used to getting ideas from other people. There's not as much of a pushback from me, because normally you'd say, I don't really like that. I don't think that. So there is a little bit of a back and forth, but if I don't think it's going to work, I will tell that person it's not going to work. I don't think it's going to work, or maybe you shouldn't do this because this has already been done, you know. So that I think that, but I don't mind working for somebody else. If like, I won't take the project on if I don't think that I can work on it, right? If I see, if somebody were to hire me to do a deck on spiders, for instance, I know from the beginning that I wouldn't be able to sit there and do research on different spiders because I don't like spiders. So you know what I mean? Like, it would be a very hard project. So I think it depends. You kind of have a gut feeling.
Very nice. So I have another question for you. This kind of bounces off what you were just talking about. This is about social media and the pressures as an artist of having an online platform, the ups and downs of that. So how do you make sure you stay true to your own vision, but still listen to what the community has to say and critique about your artwork?
Okay. Well, that depends on, so there's always a pressure. It's almost like, you know, if you have a work and you put it in a gallery and there's an opening of the gallery, and you're there, you're going to hear people talk about it, right? You're going to hear somebody say, this is so great. And somebody say, it's not so great. I don't like it, you know? So there's always going to be that. I think that there's you have to distance yourself a little bit, because once you put something in the world, you obviously are placing yourself more in a vulnerable position. So if you need to develop a little bit of a thick skin. But just, I tend not to take it personally in terms of the social media, unless they come after me, like verbally. If somebody's verbally abusive, then I will get upset. But if somebody says, I don't like her style, I think she's a bad art, I don't like the way she draws, that's a preference. I don't like other artists, and that's just the way it is. In terms of changing the content of the work because it's getting negative impact, it depends what negative impact it's getting. I think it gets a little tricky because obviously you try to do something that's not going to offend anybody, and if you always have to go in with that because you're presenting work that's going out into the world. So the idea is that you're not going to do something that's going to be hurtful to people or upsetting. But again, there's only so much that I can know. And at the same time, there's such a variation in people's experience that they can get offended by. Like, for instance, if you're showing nudity and somebody doesn't want to see that, they can tell me to cover up my drawing, but I think that's a personal choice. Like, if you feel like you can't read with a deck that presents nudity in it, don't buy the deck. Like, I'm not going to change. If I make a disclaimer and the whole deck is going to be with nudity, then obviously you got to go get something else that's similar in style but doesn't have that. So I will accept input. And if like, for instance, if somebody told me happened a couple of times that the image is similar to somebody else's, right? And if I'm creating it and I do hear that information, like somebody tags me or I know, then I won't put it out. I'll stop and I'll go back and change it, because I can't know every single image that's out there and every single deck that's out there. And there's going to be similarities. Usually it's unintentional, and it's just like you see something and it sticks with you, and then you're like, oh, I have a good idea, and then you draw it and it comes up as if it's, like I said, like if it's a personal preference, then I will not change one card just for that. I think that you have to stand your ground to some degree, because if you change for one person and then somebody else comes, you're going to change for that person, and then somebody else comes and you're going to change for that. And it will end up being a deck that is totally different than where you began with. And it's not true to yourself. There is a fine line for that. So I think it depends on an individual case, you know, like I said, like I give you the nudity aspect, or, you know, if it's offensive to a whole people, like then obviously, I wouldn't want to do that. It's really tricky in that sense. What about you?
I would say exactly the same as you. It comes down to constructive criticism, right? So if it's constructive criticism, you take it, you listen to it, and I think about it, and I'm like, oh, they make some really good points. And it wasn't a creative decision. It was more of a matter of, I didn't think about that. I didn't realize that. It was a lack of knowledge. Then now that I have corrected my knowledge, I'm going to make changes because it was constructive criticism. If it's like you said, I don't like nudity, or I don't like how you drew this, or I don't like how you drew that, or she should be wearing a blue shirt, not a red shirt. Those are more creative, right? And so I'm not going to make changes when it comes to that. So if it's more about something that came from my creativity and I had the knowledge to create that vision, I won't make any changes based on someone's negative comment. But if the comment is constructive and critical, then I'll think about it.
Right. And also, I think that if it becomes a little delicate subject matter when you're dealing with like cultural appropriation sometimes. Like some people will say that that's you're culturally appropriating something. And I really do think that at times, like, you know, if you're in your home, right? For instance, if I'm not a Buddhist, but I'm using that as an example. If I say I adhere to Buddhism, and I was not born a Buddhist, but I am a Buddhist, I believe in that right now, I should be technically able to depict an image of that and have my interpretation of that, because that's my personal experience. That doesn't necessarily mean that I am saying that this is how it's traditionally done. Like if I were to go and experience that firsthand where it originated from, right? It would probably be very different. So there is some form of a process of interpretation, because that's what an artist does. Art is, you're interpreting the outside world through your lens. So it's not going to be perfect. It never is. You know, I've seen like a lot of decks that are, for instance, vampire decks. I'm Romanian, and I can tell you that culturally speaking, it doesn't exist in Romania. We don't have vampires. And from what I know, it was a mixture of different cultural backgrounds that came. I mean, they picked from different folk traditions and came up with that idea. And so that is something that's piggybacking, it's going up on something that has been already established in my country. So I could technically take that as a cultural clash, because it's not from my culture. And I could say, you guys should not be doing vampire decks, because there is no such thing, and you're working against my my background. I'm just going to use that because I've had that impact a couple of times. I was like, but I know they're beautiful, and I know that people read with them and they read very well. And that is the interpretation of that artist that took the idea that was, mass produced initially, right? Movies and everything, and came up with this beautiful deck that has beautiful imagery. Does that depict my culture? No, it's linked to it. And so I can either get upset, or I can say, well, is it serving a purpose? Is it serving a good purpose? Like, will people get something good out of it, regardless if they're gonna fly to Romania and ask where the vampires are, which is it's not gonna take them anywhere. But I'm saying, if the purpose in the end, if it's going to give spiritual guidance, and that's maybe some people can only read through vampire decks, then I would say go for it. So that's just a little, because I've seen some discussions about that. So from my point of view, again, my own point of view, if you're going to go and take something from my cultural background, I'm not necessarily going to be upset with it, but I do know that some folks do get upset about that. But that's just,
I think this is really interesting to work off of these two particular examples. One is the Buddhist imagery example in tarot illustration, and then vampire decks, right? So, because we can kind of speak more directly and personally on that. So, for example, I do think this idea of depicting culture is a spectrum, right? You should be able, as an artist, to really interpret tradition in a way that's unique and personal. That's the whole point of creativity. I think if you're just mimicking something already there as an artist, it doesn't feel great. As an artist, you always want to put your own spin on it, especially relationships with the gods are so personal. So you want to express that in your artwork. So in terms of, for example, just using Buddhism in a very concrete example, if it's a very obvious sacred and, honorific representation of Buddhism that is not traditional Buddhism, but it's very clear that the person loves Buddhism and they're showing something very personal, that is awesome. And I actually really love that. I learn more about Buddhism from the non-traditional depiction of Buddhism. Then you have the other spectrum where, for example, if you hypersexualize a goddess, if you hypersexualize somebody's goddess who is traditionally very, very conservative and demure, I think you're going to run into problems really, really fast. It's just like no one wants to see their mom in a bikini as the sun. Like, right. You want to be very thoughtful about how you depict people's motherly and fatherly figures, right? You want to make sure it doesn't offend. So that's the spectrum. Now, in terms of vampires, what would be a vampire deck? You're like, oh, that's really cool, versus, okay, you're kind of touching on some weird ground right now.
Honestly, I can't really give you a name. I have not purchased one before. Mm-hmm. I do see them in the store. I know there's like Lenormand decks that have them. I see them on like Shots on For Love of Cards and other tarot groups. I do see them. And part of me, like, and here's the irony. I love vampire movies. Okay. So I'm the first to go. If there's a vampire movie out, I will go see that. So I don't get, it's not upsetting in that aspect. It does upset me that sometimes that is the only thing that people know from that particular culture. That's the thing. But in a way, it's like, it's a small country. So that's the gateway that people start to just learn about it. So if that's going to make them learn a little bit and then go dig more, then I'm okay with it. But I think there's a if they say vampires exist in Romania, then I will step forward and say, no, actually, you're wrong. But if you're presenting it from a fiction point of view, then I'm not going to say anything about it. So again, it depends how you are going to, interpret that. And some of them are, like I said, very beautiful. I remember visual images. I know there's a couple of decks that are like drawn and have like the almost like ghostly image faces. I should have looked for the names, but I think one is actually called the Vampire Tarot or something like that. But it's just because I can firsthand experience that. I've heard a lot about the cultural appropriation of it, and I'm not I am Romanian first and foremost. I live in America, but I'm more familiar with Romanian culture, even though I live in America. So because I grew up there, obviously my background is more there.
For sure.
And so I can identify from that point of view in terms of what I've seen, like all the stories and everything that come out from that, just springing from all these fantastic stories, right? But I know that it can expand, and there's a lot of cultures, and like for instance in the US, if you're depicting Native Americans in your decks and you're not Native American, I know a lot of people will say, well, you're not supposed to depict that. And so my question would be, would you prefer nobody to depict it? So then there will be no awareness of that culture. Like you want to keep it alive somehow. Is it perfect? No. Ideally, you would have a Native American artist creating a tarot deck. That would be the ideal, right? But how many are there? And then you can, as an artist, you can do it. You can do research for it, but there's only so much that you're going to understand, and the nuances and the subtleties of the culture you're not going to get, regardless of how much you study it. I mean, you can read books, but there's going to be something that you're missing, and you'll draw that, and that can be a problem, right? You'll name it a certain way. So there's, I guess, in a way, you have to decide if you're going to dare to go into that venue or not. Right. So, in terms of social media, that is the fear. The fear when posting something online is that you will offend or upset somebody. And whenever you post, there's always that risk. I think as an artist, you have to take it, because before social media, there were newspapers, there were galleries, and people would come physically to the gallery and see your work, and they would still get offended. They would still get upset. You would still get like the queens and the kings, because that time, right, if you're being commissioned by some patron and you do something, there'd still be some sort of a
You get your head cut off. I mean, at least
yeah,
now
I mean, there were social repercussions, right? And all the great artists, if you think back, who dared to tackle certain things at that time, they were probably not doing that great. But now looking backward, they can be seen as pioneers in something. So here's hoping, right? I'm hoping that you can be seen that way. But I think there's always going to be that risk. I mean, if you don't want that risk, then you're not going to be showing anything anytime. You just won't. You won't be putting anything up.
I don't think there's a great artist who doesn't take risk. There's different types of risk, different types of creative risk, but every single great artist I can think of, they did something that didn't have a 100% guarantee of working. Do you know what I mean? Like when you started, you didn't have a guarantee this is going to be popular or this is going to work, and you take the risk anyway. And that ultimately is the recipe, I think, for what ends up becoming great art. If everyone's going to love this for sure, you're doing something that's probably already done, already cliche, and that's why for sure that it's going to be popular. So
yeah, and the problem with that is that if it's already been done so many times, people are going to get bored of it, and it's going to be, it's not going to be memorable enough for them to want to work with your deck, unfortunately. Right. So let's see. All right, at what point in the creation process do you decide whether to self-publish or submit to a traditional publisher? How would you compare? Okay, we already touched on that one. You asked me about the process, but let me ask you, in terms of your deck, you've put your deck out, and if you ever were to do another deck, would you do the self-publishing again, or would you try and do go through a publisher?
I'm pretty familiar with the traditional publishing process, and it's also because my book was traditionally published. But with my tarot deck, I went self-publishing, and not only that, I didn't do a fundraiser, I did it 100% through my own website. And I found that I really liked that process. It's just something that happened to work for me. It wasn't something, I don't think it's something that works for everybody. So I knew pretty much from the start, if I was going to publish it, if this was going to go beyond a personal working deck, then I would do self-publishing. So that was a very clear decision for me. I never had to debate between the two. I know you have both experiences, so I'd love to hear your perspective on the traditional publishing experience versus self-publishing.
So self-publishing is easier in the sense that you have control pretty much over everything that you're doing. The hardest part is making sure that it gets funded, right? But in terms of putting it out, self-publishing, I think that people need to understand that you have to know computers in order. If you're going to self-publish by yourself without anybody helping you, you have to get some basic knowledge of some programs. So I have a graphic design background, so I can very easily take my images, scan them. I know how to do photo retouching, so I can retouch them and then upload them on a template, put them up on a printer site and send them off to the printer. I use the make playing cards as my go-to. I was working with Avalon, and the bone stone was sent to a bit larger printer. And the reason why I personally don't do that is because I don't have time to have, over 1,000 decks in my house and to ship 1,000 decks because I have 2 kids. I'm very busy during the day, so I have no help. I run my whole thing by myself, so I don't have time to do that. And for this reason, in order to keep it manageable, I go to make playing cards because I can actually do a small batch of pre-orders, send it to the printer, get a couple hundred and sell those, do a break for a couple months and do the same thing again. That might not work for everybody because the more decks you purchase, right, the lower the price for the deck comes. So for instance, you put in an order for 1,000 decks, then you're going to be paying $6 or something for each deck, right? Or sometimes even less depending on the printer. And then if you go for a lower run, meaning a couple hundred, then you're looking at prices going up for each deck. So you're looking $11, $12, depending on how many cards are in the deck. So you're losing money that way, but you have more control because the larger printers will not even take your order if you do not print a specific number of decks, right? You have to have 1,000 or more. So in that sense, I like doing things by myself. Now, going through a traditional publisher was easier because I didn't have to do any of that. I didn't have to set up the template. I didn't have to lay out the book. I just gave all the files and my manuscript, and that was it. I saw they involved me. US Games was great because they involved me in the process, meaning I saw the proofs. I could see what artistically the decisions that were being made and the box and everything. So I loved what they did. So in that aspect, it was easier, but then you have no control when you're hitting print for that deck, right? You don't know. And the money that comes in doesn't come in the way if you were printing it by yourself. You see the money right then and there. You know what you have versus you're looking in years into the future, so you don't really know.
The royalties, yeah.
Right.
I think when people, if you really want to just focus on the art as an artist, a tarot artist, and then like you said, if you're going to go self-publishing, print on demand is your best option, or traditional publishing and give it to a traditional publisher. If you're going to work with a manufacturer and have, like you said, over 1,000 decks in your home and 1,000 boxes, shipping boxes in your home and all of that, It's no longer about the art. And I think that's a really important point for people to really understand. So they go in both eyes open. If you're going to go that route, none of that is artsy.
That's
All of
not
it is
artsy at all.
business. It's warehouse management. It's
Right.
inventory.
It's
Yeah.
time consuming. It's like you're spending, 6-7 hours a day making packages instead of, drawing, or that has nothing to do with the art, that part of it. And then there's the responsibility of the money, because, if you're going through a large traditional publisher, then you're looking at over $12,000 that you need at least in order to print that. So again, you're looking into funding, right? You have to fund that. You have to set up either a Kickstarter or a pre-order or some sort, meaning you have to have a following. Following in the sense like people should know about you.
Right.
They should know who you are, and they should know that you're working on a deck. So I've seen a lot of people create decks, put up an image or two on Facebook especially, or on Instagram, and then that's what you see. That you see 1 or 2 images, and then you see a Kickstarter after. So the process of it, the way it happened, people don't see all the cards. That's how people get to know you. So I think the most important part of creating a tarot deck is actually having people have faith in you that you will finish that deck, and have a continuity in it, and also that you'll be actually sending them the product. That they're not going to be just giving you the money and they won't see the product. So in order for them to believe that, they have to know you. And in order for them to know you, you have to put your work out there consistently. Like whenever you're illustrating, keep it posting it. And by the end, right, because usually it takes a year, sometimes more in my case, to do a deck. Hopefully by the time that you finish the deck, you have enough people interested in it that are willing to spend the money and buy the deck. And then it makes funding much easier. You don't even have to do a Kickstarter. People will be, more than helpful and willing to purchase.
Yeah, I think what's so important is, as an artist, you want to think about how does an art buyer decide what to buy? We buy based on emotions, right? So people choose what artwork to support based on an emotional connection to the artist. And then if you feel like as a buyer or consumer, you have an emotional connection to the artist, you're more likely to invest a lot more money in that particular artist. So now, knowing that as an artist, you want to think about how to tell a story and how to tell your story in a way that elicits that emotion.
Right. And the market has a lot of decks right now that are, even in stores and online. And I think that there's not a lot. I mean, there's very few that you can actually remember, right? You see and you're like, I remember seeing an image, but I don't know from what deck it was or who's working on it. So that's how it gets lost, because there's so much information out there, so many visual stimuli. I think that if you don't finish the deck, like people are afraid that you're not going to finish the deck. Now you, Benebell, I know you're going to finish any deck that you start because you're going to finish it. But there's a lot of artists that will start and realize that it's 70 cards, and then 78 cards, and then they'll stop midway, right? They'll be like, so much work. And so my advice to somebody who is just starting to create a deck or has a deck is, before you even put it up, just have some interaction with your potential readers, right? Who's interested in your deck, because then it's like almost like interviewing for a job, right? If you want a job, you're going to dress the part, you're going to go speak to the heads of that department, right? They're gonna get to know you, and then they're going to, if they like you, they will hire you. If they don't, they won't. So they still need to get to know you. They have to see you, hopefully in person, and get a feel, a vibe. Same with art, I think. I think that you have to get to know the art and the artist in order to get to trust them, I guess.
That's such a great analogy, because in a job interview, everyone knows the person with the best resume is not always the one that gets hired. It's the person who can communicate confidence to the hiring partners that gets hired. So like the artist, it's not always, you know what I mean? Like, it's not always the best artist that becomes the most popular artist. If you look at who is actually the most popular trending artists, they're the ones that can inspire and communicate confidence in the buyer. So that's an important, I think, distinction.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of artists out there that are very well known, and right now it's very easy, right? It's easy for those people to start any deck or anything that they've already gone through that process, right? So I think hopefully with this platform that we're trying to create, we'll get some artists that have the nerve, the the guts to come in and visually present, have something to show to people, because I think that would be a good opportunity for them in general, otherwise, and now everything is like online, right? Everything is, Instagram, Twitter, what else is there? Snapchat and all these other platforms, Facebook, there's a lot of on Facebook, but yeah. So let me ask you one more, let's see. Okay. How much time do you spend working on your deck?
When I was working on it, oh my, full time, like it was a full-time job. I'm talking about 7-8 hours a day. And so if you think about just math, how much am I sleeping? Not a whole lot. So like it was a full-time job for me. How about you?
Yeah, well, I'm working on 2 right now. So I have to, during the day, I try to work about 4 hours during the morning while the kids are at school, and then usually from like 10 to 1 a.m.
Yeah, so
You're looking the same, like the same amount of hours. And that's the drawing part of it. Before the drawing part, I spend probably about 4 hours per card doing like research in terms of drawing, and if I can't have somebody pose in a particular way, then I will try and look for different poses, images, and yeah, it's time consuming. It's a lot of time. It takes a while, and then after you finished it, then you're looking at another a week of constant work of designing the box if you're working on it, and then setting up pricing and all that, not to mention the book. You are a writer, so I think for you it comes easier to write a book. Yeah, not so much for me.
I took a lot of selfies, to get the poses. Like, for example, you want a more, because it's really hard to find exactly the pose you're visualizing in your head for like a very action-filled composition. So I was taking so many selfies where I'm like, doing this and then, drawing the poses like that. So little background, unromantic tips and tricks.
That's what I do too. I will do I'll take different shots. Like I'll photograph my hand. I will sometimes even I'll go in, I'll dress and take the shot, and then I will go into Photoshop, and you probably know there's the liquify, right? Where you can drag, there's like a filter where you drag stuff, and I will actually change my features. I'll create the drawing, I'll do different, so it'll look like a different person, a scary person, but it gives me the sense of angles and stuff like that. Time, so it takes a lot of time.
Agreed.
About probably around about 7-8 hours a day. That's pretty accurate. All right, let's see. How do you see your art evolving, Benebell?
I think that's still a work in progress right now. So I felt like I evolved a lot over the last 2 years, going from black and white, just hand-drawn line work to the digital art. And now I think that's exactly a really good question. I'm very stumped because once you really get into the artist's mindset, you constantly want to challenge yourself and do something different. So you want your next work to transcend whatever you just did, right? And I feel like I've hit a plateau. Like everything I'm drawing right now, it's very same. Like it feels the same as what I just did. I don't feel like it's creative. It doesn't it's not cutting edge, doesn't push the envelope of my own abilities. So I feel like I'm on a plateau. So as an artist, actually, can I get advice? Free advice?
What I did, I mean, I tend to do, I have a little trick.
Okay.
Because I was actually talking, my mom was visiting and I was talking to her, and she knows that I'm working on the tarot decks. And then all of a sudden she saw me doing something else and she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I have to kind of like wipe the slate clean. Otherwise I'm going to get bored. Because so what I do, well, you can either, well, you did a tarot deck. So my advice would be to do an oracle deck.
Oh.
Because an oracle deck will force you in a way to change your style, because tarot is more it's, I don't want to say rigid, but it's constructed, right? There's certain rules. Each image has to mean something regardless of the system that you're working in. It has a meaning. So that automatically, and especially if you're a very structured person, if you are a structured person, very organized, and you're working on a tarot deck, which is already organized, then you're going to be very afraid to move either left or get out of that comfort zone. So the only way to get out of the comfort zone is to actually switch subject matters, because that's going to force you to switch your style. You can even, so I feel like oracle decks will give you freedom at the same time, and also something that will come out of it, like there's meaning to it.
I love that.
You can do abstract, you can do watercolor, you can put your handprint and just do anything, because there's no structure to it, right? There's no rule to it. So you can come up with whatever idea you want to. And I think for this reason, I like, soul cards.
Yeah.
That's very like loose, the soul cards, oracles. It's just beautiful imagery, very kind of abstract-y in a way, but she still has faces in them and all that. But it's very liberating in that sense. So that's what I would do, and myself, I will take a break from tarot drawing I'll sculpt. I'll do like pendants, I'll do statues, I'll do whatever away from anything that has to do with drawing the tarot.
Your jewelry is beautiful.
Thank you. I found that giving myself an artistic break from that particular medium that I'm working so much in will actually let me go back to it and come up with a new idea, because otherwise I will be stuck. So that's what my advice is, to do that. Even if it's like just deciding to do an abstract unrelated to any creating a deck or anything, just so you can do something without being afraid to do it or judged for it because there's always that in the back of your mind, right?
So I think we'll close out this little interview session and by having you answer the same exact question. How do you see your art evolving from here?
I have a feeling that in a couple of years, I'm going to probably go back to doing some abstract art or some oil painting. It's just, I might be wrong, but I can see myself doing that. What I've noticed was, so I put out a second edition of the Oracle of Echoes, where I added 10 additional cards. The deck itself came out in 2016, and it had it's descriptive. It's more loose, right? It's more abstract in some cases. So it's definitely not like the abyss, Tarot of the Abyss. It's not like that. It's very like wee free kind of thing. And I had to do 10 additional cards. So oh my gosh, it was so hard because my art style changed.
Oh,
I
you're
didn't realize
right.
how it changed throughout the years. I didn't even realize it. So when I was looking at the cards and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this, I realized that I was painting it totally differently.
Yeah.
And I had to kind of bring myself in and try and put myself in the mindset that I was then in order to create the images to mesh well. So that's something that it's always changing. So how you will draw in 5 years is probably, if you were to take it to put it in a deck that you're creating now, it would not, you'd have to like kind of pull yourself back. So I think that since I've done so much, detailed work, I can see going into like a more abstract
flowing stream of consciousness.
yeah, I can see myself doing that, or even going back to oil painting. I haven't done that in a long time, so maybe that. Or hey, maybe I can do a sculpture deck. I'll do sculptures of all the tarot and then photograph them and make a deck like that.
That's awesome. I would love to see your oil painting. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, they're more traditional.
Yeah,
They're
I
more
would
traditional.
imagine.
Yeah. So for the future, and in closing, the plan would be to host, just like we did right now, a potential artist that has a deck that is created, right?
Mhm.
Preferably created, it's done, and you're looking to promote it and talk about it. So that would be that's the goal. Again, we're just starting, so it'll be a process.
To celebrate the art, to celebrate artists, which is why we liked the name Tarot Art Symposium, because it really focused on the part of the tarot industry or the tarot community that we want to celebrate on this platform, which is artists.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better. You have very good ideas. You can tell that she's a writer. I'm like totally more like, I have an idea, and then I kind of stop midway.
But your art, so the banner, I loved the banner, how it ended up looking once it was on the channel. I was like, whoa, that looked really good. She has you have a really strong eye for composition. So for example, when I was doing the 3rd edition of my deck, I was really weak at composition in the beginning, and I felt like I really improved through the process. But when I look at Tarot of the Abyss or even Oracle of the Echoes, I think like innately, you're really, really good at composition. Is it intuitive?
I do sketches, and there are some rules that I learned in school that it's strange that when you learn them, you don't think you'll ever use them. But in terms of composition, groupings, they always kind of said, never put anything in the middle.
Right.
Always group 2 and 1. So there's that in the back, and that comes from more traditional painting where we did a lot of like nature objects and stuff like that, how you group them.
Mm-hmm.
But I do research, like I will sketch and then erase, and then it doesn't turn out, it doesn't work out. And but even if it doesn't work out, I will still save the idea and then come back to it. So I don't believe that anything can be a mistake. That's my goal. And I say that to my kids too, like especially when you're drawing, if you make a mistake, I don't view it as a mistake. I say, okay, what can you do to change it to make something out of that? Like if you spill something on your painting, right? If you spill a blotch of paint, how can you make that change it? Maybe something interesting will come out of it. So I think that if you're very open to making the mistake and then kind of see if you can fix it, it will work out. But yeah, I learn as I go.
Same. I love talking to you, Anna. I learned so much. I just feel like it's like free advice as an art from like a really well-seasoned artist to learn and be able to grow from. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you too. Bye everybody.
Bye.